And there was the Wuzzles, too, which predated everything.
The Wuzzles?
The Wuzzles, yeah. Go look it up. This week, we're looking at Season 3, Episode 6, Time of the Apes.
A time where apes evolved from time? It's a madhouse!
But first, Adam, I believe you have a little bit of follow-up.
Yes. Now, in our previous Shallow 13, we mentioned Frank Henenlotter and the end of his classic run of horror comedies with Frankenhooker. Now, I stand by this as true, but he did make two other horror comedies, both sequels to Basket Case, about a fella whose little brother lives in a basket he carries around throughout New York City. He made two of those after Frankenhooker, but they are no Frankenhooker.
Disappointing.
Yeah, not classics, not up there with Brain Damage, Basket Case, or Frankenhooker. I'm sorry. They're fine. And that's all the follow-up we have.
Okay. Well, should we talk about this ape movie we're dealing with?
I've looked at it in the books, and it's not against ape law. Let's go.
This week we looked at Season 3, Episode 6, Time of the Apes. Young Short Pants Johnny and his pigtailed friend Caroline go on a field trip to his uncle's laboratory, where they're freezing a bunch of monkeys so they can wake up in New York in the year 3000. Dr. Lee's assistant Catherine gamely shows the kids around, trying not to resent the responsibility of being put in charge of the wayward, ill-mannered Johnny, when a devastating earthquake forces them into the freeze capsules. They wake up in some sort of detention center where everybody's an ape. The doctor's a baboon, the soldiers are chimps, a cute boy-girl in pinstripes is a given. The three humans are threatened with death numerous times in numerous different locales before they break off to Green Mountain, where they meet Godo, who is apparently the only human left on the planet. Eventually, they're all captured again, but the commander spares them for some reason and promises them protection if they behave themselves. The girls are convinced, but Godo and Johnny know better than to trust a damn dirty ape, and they break them all out. More cat and mouse antics ensue until the cast begins taking increasing notice of a flying saucer, a representation of the mysterious Yukon that protects the humans from harm. Deciding to take their chances with aliens instead of apes, the four humans enter into some mysterious doors, only to wake up back in their own time. Only, where is Godo? The movie embarrasses itself trying to explain what all just happened, and Catherine and the children reflect on the waking horror of Godo's fate while they eat ice cream.
The crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, T-Ball's back, and the satellite of love has it. In our prologue, Joel removes Servo's bulb so the bot can be used as a T in a game of T-Ball. Despite instructions to go long, Crow misses the ball and Joel breaks a window on the SOL, and you know what that means. Everybody nearly dies! Luckily, Gypsy's around to be the adult and patch up the hole. Despite this brush with death, they resume their game the minute her back is turned. T-Ball is interrupted when the Mads come a-calling, quietly demanding an invention exchange. Why so quiet? Deep 13 is currently a nursery, with the invention of the Miracle Baby Growth Formula, which turns newborns into diapered crying men in seconds. What an antiquated invention. Nowadays, if you wanted crying diaper men, all Dr. F and Frank would have to do is put a pro-feminist video on their YouTube channel. Back on the SOL, Joel's invention is the cellulite phone, which direct dials you to Richard Simmons. You know, presuming that Simmons is not being held hostage by his housekeeper. In segment 2, Tom Servo narrates Why Doesn't Johnny Care? An educational film on indifference cobbled together from Time of the Apes clips. The gang keeps up the play acting in segment 3 as Joel and the bots recreate the Scopes monkey trial with the aid of celebrity impressions and a cardboard cutout of People's Court host Judge Wapner. The crew pretends to do a news program, Around the Earth in 30 Minutes, for segment 4. Crow hosts the program's Fashion Minute, discussing the outfits of Time of the Apes. In the epilogue, Joel and the bots sing a tender ode to Sandy Frank, while in Deep 13, the Mads adult baby says his first words. I'll push the button. Well, we did it. We watched Time of the Apes, which is one of a new batch of episodes put on Netflix. And I'm happy to rewatch this one. I loved this episode when I first watched it, and I found that it held up. I really enjoyed it.
This is apparently a fan favorite, and it makes sense that this would be the way a lot of people move into Mystery Science Theater 3000 because there's a lot of fans of Planet of the Apes, and this is close.
Yes, squint and you might see Planet of the Apes. This is a great disservice to the great Planet of the Apes movies. How dare you?
I have to admit, I did not like this movie when I first saw it years ago, and I still am not a big fan. There are good jokes. I really like the running gags they have about how horrible Johnny is, but I find this movie just such an unpleasant experience that it kind of means that the riffs don't make it entertaining enough for me. That said, totally check out the sketches. They are great.
Yeah, this is again, like the sketches here, especially the Scopes monkey trial sketch.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, this is what I want from the show. It's this weird tone that like kept me coming back to the show. There's some great stuff, and this episode has one of my favorite riffs of all time, which is when there's of course, a UFO that is a prominent part in the movie, and it reveals to an ape who is angry at a human being that it was not the human being that killed the angry ape's son, but that he killed his son by accident. And when that's revealed, you just have Joel voicing the UFO with, "I killed my own son."
Hurts, don't it? Bye.
It's a peak Joel moment. I hope there's a clip, because god damn it, that's like the funniest moment in the episode for me. It's interesting that you mentioned that this movie was overwhelming, because I found it so benign, and it is kind of it shows its roots, which we'll get into later, but it definitely does not have the edge that, say, even a PG movie would have.
I think my issue with it is that it has no excuse for being as bad as it is. You know, like everyone involved seems to be good at their jobs. The camera person, the director, the writers, is just like, it feels like you guys know what you're doing. So why did you put together something that has so many ridiculous plot holes? If you really want to irritate me, just create a whole bunch of scenarios that are not sufficiently cleared up. There's so many Chekhov's guns just lying around the set of this movie, and nobody ever picks them up.
Well, there is a reason for that. Can we get into that right now?
Let's do it.
Well, this isn't a movie. This has never been a movie. It will never be a movie. Time of the Apes is a TV show that's been cut into a film, and it's been further cut down for Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Mm-hmm.
So what made very little sense to North American audiences when Sandy Frank essentially took the first episode and last episode of a show and glued them together makes even less sense.
Yeah, it didn't work.
No, it didn't work at all. It's think about that. Imagine any TV show where you tried to do that. Like even if the finale and the premiere are related, could you imagine gluing Encounter at Farpoint to All Good Things from Star Trek: The Next Generation and presenting it as a movie?
It would maybe work with Twin Peaks.
Yeah, because Twin Peaks never makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, when you think of the fact that it's 26 30-minute episodes, like that's 13 hours that they had to put down to what, 90 minutes?
Yes, and so like they tried to make that just a standard feature, and that's why this movie feels like this honestly like led me to enjoy the movie to a certain degree, is that it's constantly throwing things at you and seems to have a different climax every few minutes, and that's because it's essentially...
Did you just make a joke about throwing things?
Yes.
With monkeys?
I tried to subtly sneak that one in there.
All right.
But it's always going out of its way to introduce some crazy, colorful new element. It's like, oh, cryosleep. Yeah, that's a thing that they're experimenting on with apes. Oh, no, they're experimenting with humans. Oh, now there's an earthquake. Oh, now they're in a future with apes. Oh, now there's UFOs. Oh, now there's an ape-human resistance of one. Oh, P.S. There's just so much stuff. There's also a civil war with apes that lasts exactly one scene. Because it's a major subplot of the TV series, which was called Saru no Gundam, or roughly translates as Army of Apes.
Maybe you could explain this for me, because this is something that really bothered me.
Okay.
The Chekhov's gun. They introduced the fact that they have cryogenically frozen a very rich man who will become very young when he wakes up thousands of years later. And then it's never referred to again. I thought maybe that would be Godo, but that is not who it is. Is that just Nothing.
See, I think in addition to whoever that was supposed to be, that might not even be in the Japanese TV show. Because remember, this is Sandy Frank we're dealing with here.
Mm.
So that just might be a really sloppy translation.
Yeah, there was an icicle guy, though.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely like a man who has been frozen or a lady who's been frozen. I don't think we ever see them outside of like the bad, foam ice makeup that they have on them. But yeah, that doesn't pay off at all. And to my knowledge, it never did in the show.
Yeah, see, exactly. That's screenwriting 101. You don't just like introduce something like that and then just leave it hanging.
Yes, that's why whenever Anton Chekhov takes out his gun on the original Star Trek, it always fires a photon torpedo in the third act. Let me tell you about some of the great episode titles that we are missing because we are watching a truncated version of this TV show.
All right.
These are some of the great episode titles. My Bride Will Be Cute. Tears of a Mother Monkey.
All right.
Message to a Beloved Monkey. And my favorite, which is greater, human or computer?
I should mention these are not monkeys.
No, they're apes.
There's nary a monkey about them. No tails. So, I mean, I get it. This is more Sandy Frank's fault than the original makers, but it just made me very angry, this movie.
And I can totally see why. I am somewhat astounded by the incoherence of it, and I'm a little bit disappointed that there's such a logical explanation. Like the Japanese TV series Army of the Apes is so crazy that it has a robot in it. There's a whole subplot about a robot. There is an army of ninja apes dressed as ninjas.
Oh.
In the TV show that is sadly completely absent from the movie. Like there's lots of crazy stuff that we don't get that makes me really wish we had seen the series. Like maybe for shorter movies, they could have just shown random episodes of this TV show instead of Time of the Apes, much like they did with General Hospital and some of the Joel episodes.
So one of the things that surprised me was that the series was actually quite popular in Japan.
Well, no.
No?
No,
okay.
the TV series is not popular in Japan, but it was a ripoff of something that was big in Japan.
What was the name of that show?
Well, it was a little show of movies called Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one with Charlton Heston, right?
He is in 1.5 of those movies, yes.
Oh, really? He comes back for the sequel. I didn't know that.
Right, because remember we were talking about this for The Deadly Mantis, where he basically blows up the titular Planet of the Apes, spoiler, it was Earth all along, in the second movie, and somehow there were still sequels after that.
So it was Heston who blew up the planet?
Yes, he gets mortally wounded in part 2 because he agreed to do the sequel, but only under the condition that like he wouldn't keep getting asked to do more sequels, which actually in hindsight he said was a dumb move.
I don't want more money. What are you talking about?
He's like, you have to understand, in those days, sequels weren't respected.
Yeah, Planet of the Apes. It's all right.
I confess, I love the Planet of the Apes movies.
Yeah, they're good. They're classics for a reason.
And in fact, I have to take something back. This, in some ways, is another bit of follow-up. In our episode on 804, when we're doing the Deadly Mantis and there were the bomb worshippers, we were talking about the Planet of the Apes series a little bit then, and I had said, yeah, there's about 3 movies that are worth watching. I was wrong. It's 4. The first 4 OG, and this is strictly OG Planet of the Apes. The first 4 films are great, and honestly, one of the reasons why we have an uncut version of the 4th film is because it was so popular in Japan. This series was popular enough, and it seemed to be specifically big in Japan, and I think I know why, or at least I have a theory.
Okay.
We've been talking a bit about the giant monster movies that came out of Japan and their rise and fall. We've talked a lot about their origins with the very first Godzilla. Now, although we have not made good in our plan to sit down and watch the original Godzilla, which will eventually happen. You are well aware that first film is deadly serious. But what follows gets increasingly kind of like comic booky and then outright cartoony and then almost surreal in its goal to entertain children towards the end of those kind of monster movie runs. You see that with Gamera very quickly as how crazy and surreal they get.
Right.
And that was all Japanese sci-fi was for a time. Like mainstream Japanese sci-fi meant that you had silly monster movies or movies with a similar tone. And I think by the 1970s, especially with the state of the Japanese economy, which was not great in the 70s, like there's a reason they stopped making Godzilla movies in the mid-70s.
Mm-hmm.
And they took a whole decade off, which is almost unheard of, unfathomable to go such a long time without a Godzilla movie. There's a reason that I think that audiences were hungering for sci-fi, like escapist stuff, but something that had a grittier and realer edge. And the Planet of the Apes movies were those. Even though the Planet of the Apes movies had dwindling budgets, because that's just how Hollywood did sequels at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Planet of the Apes movies were smart about it. The first two movies take place in the futuristic ape world, and the movies that follow that either take place in present day or near future Earth, or they take place in a kind of, the last one takes place in a kind of Garden of Eden of apes, so they just have to film in a forest.
It also occurred to me that one of the reasons I find this movie so irritating is exactly the point you made. It's meant for children.
Yeah, even though like Johnny's not the focus in this like super cut down edited version of Time of the Apes.
But it's made for Johnnies.
Very much so, yeah. This is a show for Johnnies. Strong enough for a man, but made for Johnnies.
Yeah, like the target audience has to be little boys. And for that reason, like it's got a grit to it, but when it comes to like personal endangerment, there's nothing to worry about, you know? So it's like kind of gritty themes, but on the actual floor, it's kind of cartoonish and a little cutesy.
Yeah, that's the curious thing. And I think it probably had something to do with the fact that this was made for television, whereas the Planet of the Apes movies were made for theatrical audiences. And that was like kind of the interesting tension. And I think this happens with all fantastical sci-fi and what led to the change in the Godzilla series, which is that if you're going to make fantastical creature features, kids are going to come, even though they're not necessarily aimed at kids. Kids are going to come to the movies and love them and love those creatures. And kids loved Planet of the Apes when they were coming out. And so when it came to the fourth film, which is arguably one of the bleaker ones, it's hard to say because almost all those movies are just a bleak buffet.
Right.
They had to really edit down Conquest for the Planet of the Apes, which is about the ape revolution happening. And in the uncut version, the Japanese audiences got, and they're the reason why we have a clean, clear print of the uncut version of the film. That movie ends with, admittedly, humans in ape suits, but a bunch of apes beating humans savagely to death.
Whoa.
And taking over. Yeah, they're like the last few shots of the movie are either fire, Roddy McDowall giving terrifying speeches of taking over the world, or bloodied human faces.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was significantly toned down for American release because that was the problem, is that, you know, it's like we don't want to scare away kids. And apparently in test screenings, there were a lot of crying children.
Oh, no.
But, you know, this is what Japanese audiences wanted. And you could see ape fever crawling into cinema. I mean, there's one movie that really matches the tone of the Planet of the Apes series that was made in Japan. It was called Prophecies of Nostradamus, or Last Days of Planet Earth, which is essentially just taking that somewhat seriously as Nostradamus predicting the end of the world, but is really just showing, it's almost like a sketch, not a comedy sketch film, but a series of vignettes about the world ending and different horrible accidents that are happening, ultimately leading to this like horrible dream sequence in which irradiated humans are fighting over a rat to eat. So that's a very bleak film that way. And on the more cartoonish side of things, the second last Godzilla movie of the 70s, 1973's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the origin of Mechagodzilla is that he was created by rejects from Planet of the Apes, a planet full of apes.
What?
Yep, they decide to come to Earth, and they built a robot Godzilla because they want to take over Earth. And that's the plot of the movie. So I guess also worth mentioning is that there were several Planet of the Apes TV series in the 1970s, and the live-action one certainly made its way to Japan. but it was also...
Live action?
Yep.
What?
Yes.
Was it like a studio audience or what?
It was Gilligan's Planet of the Apes. Which actually, come to think of it, would be the perfect crossover, the perfect meeting of the minds. Isn't the perfect straight man for Gilligan Charlton Heston? God damn it, Gilligan, this is a coconut. That's a series. But no, like the live action Planet of the Apes, I can't speak for all of it. I know that Space used to air it very early on when we finally got a sci-fi channel of our own in the late 90s. But the very first episodes were written by Rod Serling, who wrote the original Planet of the Apes screenplay. Yeah. So at least started off on kind of a high note. I don't know how well the series pulled itself together and kept going, but judging by ratings, not so much. Because it was not a hit in America or Japan. But the movies certainly were a big hit in Japan. And Tsuburaya Productions, that is responsible for this, they just gave the people what they wanted, but they did it for TV. And it is definitely kiddie, but at the same time, watching this in its Time of the Apes form, I can't help but wonder, who is this for?
Yeah, I think if what you're saying is true and it wasn't that popular, it was probably that maybe they overestimated how much kids love apes.
Yeah, at least on the Japanese side of things. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, because this did get its full 26 episode run, but was never brought back, and they never thought of continuing it. It was apparently not a great ratings hit.
Well deserved. So, Adam, one of the moments in this movie that did really stand out for me was near the conclusion, where the commander, who always seems to have a soft spot for the humans for no apparent reason, asks the humans to stay. And Catherine and the children very clearly state humans should not live with apes.
Now, that seems like good advice to me. But do you suppose that that's because they hate every ape they see, from chimpanzee to chimpanzee?
It just seemed like a strange moment to basically suggest that diversity is bad, in a strange way. Like, I know we're talking about species here, but that even that commingling is not possible. Even though it clearly is possible. They have the commander and their little buddy Pepe. Like, it really was a strange thing that seems to be the point they're trying to make at the very end of this series / movie.
Yes, it's almost like the conflict between Godo and Gabar is kind of hammering that home. It's like humans and apes, it's a tragedy, it's never going to work. Which is weird, because at least from what we can see in the movie, I can't speak for the show, there doesn't seem to be any real conflict between humans and apes, other than like it drives the plot of the show.
Right. We are apparently in a future where there are no humans except for Godo, and that is good enough reason, I guess, to be freaked out if you're not used to seeing what they refer to as naked apes. But they seem to know who humans are and that they shouldn't be around. But they never explain why there's that antagonism between the two, like they did in the actual Planet of the Apes. And it seems to me strange that it would be the humans at the end of this who would be resisting kind of living in ape culture and taking their risks with the unknown alien saucer.
Yeah, and you know what? I that's really, putting me in a rock and a hard place. Do you go with aliens and their love of probing, or do you go with apes and their love of poop flinging and disfiguring humans?
It did make me think, and this is a bit more dark, but how white supremacists in the States, people like Richard Spencer, they really admire Japan. In fact, I'll put a link in the show notes. A lot of white supremacists are huge Japanophiles. And so I think they're creating an idea of Japan that is probably not accurate. There's this kind of fetishization of the Japanese for being the kind of ethnoculture that they are trying to promote.
Yeah, and you know what? I can't help but wonder if that's just an excuse to be like, listen, no, we just want to be like Japan. Everybody loves Japan.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, like, that's just another way of covering up the fact they're insanely racist.
Yeah, and it's just interesting in this movie to see something like, no, humans is humans and apes is apes,
Now, Beth, when you say that they're huge Japanophiles, do you just mean that they're sad single dudes with waifus?
More or less.
Oh, man, that said, I would absolutely love to see what an ape would do to Richard Spencer.
Yeah, we've seen enough humans clobber him. Let's see some apes do it.
Yeah. Oh, man. Just throw a baboon at him. See what happens.
Anyway, I do wonder if maybe the actual series brings this together. Maybe, like, what is the commander's deal? Why is he trying so hard to get these humans to stay with him and teach Johnny some manners? What is the long game there?
You know, and maybe the point is they're trying to figure out the UFO, because the UFO is a mystery to them, and the humans get a better idea of what it is and what it represents. And I don't know, the whole thing is just a mess.
Oh, God.
By the way, Beth, just going to pop in here and say that one of the episodes of the TV show, from the sketchy notes that we have been generously given by somebody on some wiki somewhere, link in the show notes, there is an episode of the original series in which it's called The Saucer Enemy or Ally, where the 4 humans learn that the commander is about to be executed as part of the back and forth, right? And they decide to rescue him because I guess he's been so nice to them. So that is one of the reasons perhaps why he is especially favorable to them towards the end.
I see.
Like,
Okay.
I guess they've been a pawn in the middle of this ape rebellion situation. But yeah.
Okay. But to ask them to live with him, maybe he figured it would be better than aliens.
Anything's better than aliens.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shadow 13.
All right, it's time for the Shadow 13. 13 fun facts about Time of the Apes and this episode of MST3K. Go, 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 Beth, go!
Some Misties are sure to recognize the credit of Tsuburaya Productions. Eiji Tsuburaya, the special effects whiz who created Godzilla and Ultraman, founded his production company in 1963. For more on Eiji Tsuburaya, check out It's Just a Show, episode 21 on the KTMA version of Gamera vs. Baragon.
When Catherine, Carolyn, and Johnny perform a B&E, Crow riffs on William Conrad's First Alert ads. First Alert was not for home security, but fire safety. The ads for these fire alarms featured Conrad resting in an armchair, waving a flashlight in an otherwise empty home. They're like the old Mayor Tommy Shanks sketches from SCTV without a punchline. We'll have a link to an ad in our show notes.
Speaking of which, the traditional Japanese paper-covered doors that our heroes blithely tear a hole into are called shoji, and the paper, being paper, gets dinged and torn easily. You typically have to replace it every year or so. Ripping up a stranger's door still seems pretty rude.
When Dr. Lee enters a lab and sees the kids, he says, "Well, it's about time." Tom's reply, "It's about space," quotes the theme song to It's About Time, a 1960s sitcom about 2 astronauts who get sent back in time and live among cave people.
It's about time, it's about space, about 2 men in the strangest place.
The show was created by Sherwood Schwartz and borrowed sets from another Schwartz show, Gilligan's Island. Oh, also, it starred Imogene Coco as a cave woman called Shag.
The earthquake prompts Joel and Tom to say,
I love the sound of breaking glass.
Especially when I'm lonely.
Yeah.
These moody lines are the start of Nick Lowe's song, I Love the Sound of Breaking Glass.
I love the sound of breaking glass, especially when I'm lonely.
The song, which charted in the UK, comes from Lowe's 1978 album, Jesus of Cool, a title which absolutely got changed for a US release.
Crow name-checks Bedtime for Bonzo, a 1951 film in which a professor tries to teach human morals and customs to an ape. The film is remembered only because the professor in question was played by Ronald Reagan, and its title was often used in criticism of his time as President of the United States. See the Ramones' Bonzo Goes to Bitburg.
Tom thinks Pepe the ape girl will run into David Hedison while plotting an escape from the vents. Hedison is best known for hanging out in the equally cramped confines of a submarine on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, starring alongside Gypsy's perma-crush, Richard Basehart.
Face it, Pepe and some of the other apes look more like owls than apes. This prompts the following exchange between Joel and Crow.
Oh, great, it's a planet of owls.
And they are not what they seem. Get it?
The owls are not what they seem was a cryptic warning, and it was offered by Twin Peaks' Lodge Giant, aka the Fireman, to Agent Cooper, hinting that the evil spirit Bob would leave Leland Palmer and hop into the body of an owl. Twin Peaks, proof that MST3K wasn't the weirdest TV show of the 90s.
You say that Pepe looks like an owl, and she does, but there really are primates that look like that, especially with Pepe's little white face. There are white-faced gibbons that are native to the Pacific Rim, which would make sense, because this is a Japanese movie.
The UFO is compared to The Invaders, a Quinn Martin series created by Larry Cohen. Cohen's paranoid adventure about aliens masquerading as humans suffered a blow when its creator opined that no aliens would be left on Earth after the show's hero killed them off every week. It was cancelled after 2 seasons and unsuccessfully remade in 1995 with Scott Bakula.
Late in the episode, Joel quips, "I don't feel very good. I'm going to rent Faces of Death." Faces of Death was an American take on Italy's Mondo movies, claiming to feature real-world moments of death and mayhem that were too gruesome for mainstream film and TV. While some of the violence featured in the film was real, the majority of scenes, including an infamous bit where the brains of a monkey are eaten by sophisticates, are obviously fake.
Joel compares the ape minister to craggy-faced character actor Darren McGavin.
Wait a minute, it's Darren McGavin.
I knew it.
The charismatic McGavin is, depending on your age, best known for the role of Private Eye Mike Hammer, monster hunting reporter Carl Kolchak, the dad from A Christmas Story, Murphy Brown's dad, Billy Madison's dad, Frank Black's dad, or Arthur Dale's father of the X-Files. McGavin may be remembered by Misties for appearing as a NASA scientist in Hangar 18, the 19th episode of the series KTMA season.
They probably don't remember that.
It's a pretty good episode.
Crow comments on the film's Fashions by Izzy Miyake in segment 4. Miyake, a graphic design student turned fashion designer, created clothes for men and women that range from the iconic, such as Steve Jobs' famous black turtleneck, to the strange, like his boxy, multicolored flying saucer dress that makes the wearer look like a polygonal video game character.
And that's time.
So, Adam, this is one of many Sandy Frank movies that MST3K deals with in its very long run. And you get a feel for the kind of things that this man liked to distribute.
Yes, he'd just take anything he could buy from Japan and dub it poorly, often re-editing them with disastrous results, as we see here.
Yeah, I mean, I did a little bit of research to see if there was an interesting backstory, but my impression is he's just a money man who tried to find the cheapest and easiest way to make a quick buck.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw this, but there's an extra that was made for the MST3K versus Gamera box set that Show Factory put out ages ago. And they did an in-depth interview with Frank. And first off, one of the funniest things about it is that there is more Vaseline on the camera lens than there is for love interests on the original Star Trek. Or even close-ups of Shatner's face on the original Star Trek. And that's amazing. I've never seen anything that is simultaneously blurry and shot in high def at the same time. But yes, the elderly Frank goes over his career and kind of inadvertently reveals that he's just kind of okay at his job. Like, Sandy Frank tried and failed to sell advertisers on a show starring Liberace.
How do you screw up Liberace?
I don't know, but he tries to, well, listen, Liberace's play screwed up on his own. But but Sandy Frank couldn't sell Liberace, which is that's crazy. Everybody wanted Liberace. Come on. Yeah. He also could not sell investors on a Broadway show directed by Steven Spielberg. Admittedly, this was before Steven Spielberg was a, Hollywood big shot, because why would he need Sandy Frank? But still, it's wow, there's a lot that he couldn't sell. And for what he could sell, I mean, what can we say? I mean, he sold Bill Cosby's first network show to NBC. Great. Bill Cosby's legacy.
Maybe some defense is there was a rumor going around for a while that MST3K had lost the rights to Sandy Frank movies because he was irritated by the riffing that his movies got. That appears to not be the case. It was just a legal thing over who owned the rights, and Shout Factory couldn't get it from Comedy Central. Comedy Central didn't care about its property anymore, so it had nothing to do with Sandy Frank at all. He did not have a grudge. Yeah, and of course, when the rights to Gamera, and specifically any kind of dubs of Gamera, reverted back to Toei, Toei and Dai, they're pretty protective of Gamera.
not quite as protective as Toho is of Godzilla, but still pretty protective. So that also became kind of a monkey wrench in the works. But no, you're absolutely right. I heard the rumors for a long time, like when I first got on the internet and was a fan of MST3K in the 90s. I had heard the rumors that Sandy Frank was livid about jokes like the one in this episode where they start saying Sandy Frank likes to crap in his hand.
Sandy Frank likes to crap in his hand.
I hope he doesn't see this.
Again, another MVP moment from this episode. Most valuable primate. But in the documentary, in that little short that's on the MST3K versus Gamma Disc, he said that he thought the show was cute.
Yeah.
And that he has, like, it's like, listen, it's not something I'm like a big fan of, but I thought that they did their job and they were, he clearly knew what he was in for when he sold them the rights, and he's well aware of the jokes and he doesn't mind it at all. So he never refused the rights. And it makes sense because Sandy Frank is all business.
Yes.
He could make money if he resells them the rights. So he doesn't mind at all. Say what you want about Sandy Frank. He wants to make a buck.
Yeah.
In fact, wait. Didn't you find something amazing about the lengths that Sandy Frank will go? Beth, you must tell us, because this made me love Sandy Frank.
All right. So this is from the New York Daily News, which has an overview of a recent spat between him and his wife, which I have to say has the bitchiest photos I've ever seen in terms of like... This is so mean of the New York Daily News for picking out these specific photos, but I digress. So, quoted from the piece, longtime friend Phil Ullman said Frank is incredibly intense, a fabled deal maker, and a colorful character who once forced a plane to land by feigning a heart attack to get into a meeting.
I'm so proud of Sandy Frank.
That is kind of awesome.
Yeah, I had no idea that Sandy Frank was Grunkle Stan from TV's Gravity Falls. But this was Frank's thing. Like, he had some American successes. He walked away from some American successes. Like, famously, he turned down distribution rights to The Gong Show.
Oh,
because
boy.
he thought The Gong Show was mean-spirited, and he's not wrong.
No, it's extremely mean-spirited.
Yeah, but
it turns out Americans like mean-spirited.
Yeah, and that's it on the interview in that Shout Factory disc. He laments the fact that he let his personal feelings get in the way of a deal. Which, again, like, there's a part of me that's like, I admire this money-loving man.
Why isn't he the president of the U.S.?
He would be a much better choice, because you know what? Then that would just mean that the world would be cut up pretty badly and just badly dubbed, which is much better than it currently is. This episode has one of my all-time favorite sketches, which is the Scopes Monkey Trial sketch. But I guess for a bit of a background, should we go over the Scopes Monkey Trial at all? Really?
Yeah. It's not quite what you think. I mean, I always thought of it as, this science versus religion standoff in the law. Tennessee law basically said you had to have the biblical account of creation taught in schools. Scopes tried to teach the theory of evolution and got brought to court because basically the Tennessee was saying this is the way it had to be taught. And this was 1925. And they lost. And I thought this was a terrible example of just, the ignorance of, religious conservatives and how it had taken over. But apparently, they kind of won, but they decided to lose on a technicality just because it served their case better.
Wait, to lose on a technicality?
Yeah, kind of, because in the court of public opinion, they lost because Darrow basically savaged William Jennings Bryan, and they wanted it to be taken to a higher court. So they basically kind of rolled over in order for that to happen. And the added benefit of that was that William Jennings Bryan wasn't able to do his closing speech as a result, which was supposed to be his shining moment because he was a great orator.
Yeah, that's what he was famous for, was just that, like, it isn't really the sort of stereotype of the old Southern lawyer more or less based on him.
No, this is what I thought. I thought that too, but it's actually based on Jimmy Stewart character from a different movie.
Oh, never mind.
I made the same mistake. I thought it's the I'm just a country mutant chicken or whatever that is. That
yes,
is
from
not,
Futurama.
Yeah, that is not Clarence Darrow. That is
And it's not based on Williams Jennings Bryan either. It's so strange.
No.
Because like I associate that when I think of that joke and that sort of foghorn leghorn lawyer, I always think of the Scopes monkey trial.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I find so interesting about this sketch is that it's more about pop culture than it is about the Scopes monkey trial.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love that the way that it's done is that everything is through the lens of a character and a bad impression, because it's not Crow as Clarence Darrow, it's Crow as Spencer Tracy as Clarence Darrow, and Crow in the sketch in character hasn't prepared, so he just
It's
says,
wonderful.
yeah, it's
Which is so Crow, it's also just like a good, like he never prepares. He's a bad student.
yeah, it's like they knew these characters inside out. Tom is deeply into the part and is overplaying it, and Crow just says something along the effects of man evolved from apes, deal with it. And Joel even asks him, is that all you have? And he's like, yeah. And Joel introduces himself as F. Lee Bailey as a way of giving him a chance to read his lines as though he is a child delivering a school pageant. Like it's
Which
amazing.
is also very Joel.
Oh, it's so good. There's like, this is the first time I'm watching MST3K and I think Joel's flubs are intentional.
The country lawyer trope is based off of Jimmy Stewart's character Paul Bigler from Anatomy of a Murder.
Oh, I've never seen that.
And here's a quote. I'm just a humble country lawyer trying to do the best I can against this brilliant prosecutor from the big city of Lansing.
I don't. That movie's set in Michigan, so I'm not actually sure that he's got a southern accent in.
I'm just a humble country lawyer trying to do the best I can against this brilliant prosecutor from the big city of Lansing.
But yeah, there's so many wonderful things in that sketch. I love that the judge is the judge from the People's Court, but he is referred to not by the name of the People's Court judge. He's referred to as Judge Harry Morgan, which is a hybrid of Harry Morgan, the actor from MASH, and Judge Harry from Night Court.
Yeah.
And it's Gypsy is not playing. Gypsy is playing what Joel calls a John Scoops in the sketch. It's amazing.
One of the things that I found out, it's amazing because, this is just some Scopes trial, something that I've not always known in the back of my head. And I assumed I knew the details of it. But once I started researching it, it was way more fascinating. And what came out of it is kind of the tragedy of William Jennings Bryan.
Oh, do tell.
Because you kind of assume he's just he's this blowhard Southern evangelical, right? Who just, first of all, he was a Democrat, which surprised the hell out of me. I mean, this is before the civil rights movement, so he was arguably probably more of a Dixiecrat than a Democrat. But he supported the suffragettes. He supported the temperance movement. He was an opponent of American imperialism. The reason that he didn't like the theory of evolution was for not just religious but humanitarian grounds. He thought that it supported human cruelty. You know what? He's not wrong. Social Darwinism has been used in some pretty bad situations.
That's true.
So in a lot of ways, he was an idealist. Like he just wanted the best for humanity, and he thought that embracing evolutionism would make people kind of take this Nietzschean might makes right philosophy to heart. Even his creationism is not the kind of creationism we think today, which is very literally like it took 6 days. This is exactly how long. Like he actually was open to the idea that by day you meant an age, right?
Yeah.
And so what's so tragic about this is, so he was put on the stand and then it proved that, and Darrow kind of savaged him for showing inconsistencies in his thought. And then he basically died 5 days later.
Yeah.
Possibly of the humiliation. And I've got a really awful quote here about his death.
No.
So let's see. So when someone remarked to Darrow that Bryan died from a broken heart, Darrow responded, "Broken heart? Hell, he died of a busted belly." And journalist H.L. Mencken, who disliked Bryan intensely, reportedly boasted to Darrow that "we killed the son of a bitch."
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to stand by those quotes when you believe in the movie version of this event, or at least like the fictionalized version that you kind of grow up knowing secondhand.
Yeah, it's more complicated. There's more nuance once you look at it. But I haven't seen the movie that this is based on, which is also what the sketch is kind of riffing on, which is Inherit the Wind.
Mhm.
I don't suppose you've seen it?
No, because when I was thinking of what that movie was called, one of the titles that crossed my list was Godzilla vs. Megalon, which I'm still not sure. That might be correct. I don't know. But no, I have never seen it. But I know the Scopes Monkey Trial just from pop culture. Like I just, it's one of those things that you just know. You barely even remember learning it in class. You just know it, And you know it in this very stereotyped, very simplified, one-dimensional way.
Yeah, although apparently the town did have a lot of monkeys around during the actual trial.
Oh.
Just as like a way to get 2 bits of gander.
Terrifying.
So, as we kind of maybe uncovered, apes were a popular trope in the 70s, kind of launched by Planet of the Apes. And, there's a lot of movies that have apes in them because they're somewhat trainable.
Somewhat.
So this made me think about one of my favorite characters from Planet of the Apes, who is Dr. Zaius, a somewhat sympathetic, white-haired character of wisdom. But I was actually trying to think if there was any other apes from popular culture that has had as much...
Wait, you found Dr. Zaius sympathetic?
Well, at least interesting.
He's definitely interesting. He's awful mean to Charlton Heston and all humans. It's Roddy McDowell's ape. It's Cornelius and Zira who are the sympathetic apes.
Right. Okay, so sympathetic is the right word, but Dr. Zaius is maybe the most interesting because his hatred of humans makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
But I know in our previous episode that was heavily featured apes, I had mentioned Clyde from Clint Eastwood films and how badly he was treated off set.
Yes, and that's true, I think, of all apes. I think it's even true of the Bedtime for Bonzo ape, too. Yeah.
Not surprising. Can you think of any apes from popular culture that you look at fondly and not sadly?
Well, sure. I think of a couple of simians from popular culture that I deeply, deeply love. And they are as follows. There was a film by George A. Romero called Monkey Shines, an experiment in fear, which was all about a guy who got a helper monkey. And it turned out that that was that little experiment. Beth, it was an experiment in fear, as it turns out.
For the monkey or the human?
Well, for both, I think, but mostly the human, because he was the one with the chimpanzee. And the movie actually kind of sucks, and the chimp is not that interesting. But I will say this. I will say this indeed. There is something that I absolutely adore about Monkey Shines. And what I adore about Monkey Shines is its cover art, which is haunting. And I will put that in the Slack right now. The cover for Monkey Shines. It's one of those little symbol monkeys, except instead of symbols, it has a bloody razor blade.
Effective.
Yeah, it's super creepy. This image, I don't think, is seen in the movie. It's just a great poster. Link in the show notes for nightmares. What about you, Beth? Do you have a favorite ape aside from Dr. Zaius?
Don't have a favorite ape, simply because so many of their stories seem to involve tragedy somehow. And apes, I feel bad for them. They're so close to humans that inevitably they get a lot of tragedy in their lives, I think.
Well,
okay. You want to follow up on that?
I was just going to say, what'll turn that frown upside down? King Kong, when he's introduced, he dies because beauty killed the beast. But you know what? He was popular enough to be revived by lightning and grow 4 times his size. And he got to fight Godzilla in 1963's King Kong versus Godzilla.
All right.
So you know what? Second lives and happy endings for all apes.
Yeah, so apes make me feel a bunch of sad, complicated feelings, but I don't feel any of those for monkeys. They can just go to hell. So one of my favorite monkeys is Marcel from Friends. And what I like about Marcel from Friends is everybody hates him.
Oh, good.
Deservedly so. He's awful and kind of everybody acknowledges that. And Marcel is basically an embodiment of how much Ross sucks. Because Ross gets him to be interesting. He gets an illegal, exotic animal because he thinks it'll make him interesting. and it fails spectacularly.
Oh, here's something I never realized. So what you're saying is that Ross is to Friends what Starburns is to Community?
Kind of, yeah.
Oh, that makes so much sense and makes that show more appealing to me now. Tell me, does Marcel rip off Ross's jaw, genitals, and feet?
No, at least, well, I mean, it's funny you should mention that because the monkey Marcel was actually played by two different monkeys, Katie and Monkey, and they were legendarily hated by all of the cast.
Oh, no.
Let's see. David Schwimmer told Entertainment Weekly in 1995, "I hate the monkey. I wish it were dead." I'm trying to think.
Now, in fairness, John Mahoney said the same thing about the dog from Frasier.
So the trainer was Denise Sanders, who mentioned that Katie was the more active one, and then there was Monkey was a bit more mellow. So that's how they kind of use them. If they needed a sitting down scene, they would use Monkey. But this is the perfect quotation, and I'll have a link to this Telegraph article in the show notes. While Sanders praised their talents, it was also no secret that the pair were nightmares on the set of Friends, regularly holding up filming, vomiting up worms, and defecating on the furniture.
Ugh.
Yeah. Monkeys.
Nothing good about them.
Have you ever seen Aguirre, Wrath of God?
Yes, I have.
That to me is monkeys.
I would also say that Klaus Kinski is more monkey than man.
So Marcel was kind of a gimmick very early on in the season's run, and they kind of got rid of him by the end of season 1. And it's, at one point in the middle of season 6 or 7, Ross just kind of turns to everyone else and just like, "You remember when I had a monkey?"
Hey, Beth. Do you know what Katie the monkey did after Friends?
Community.
Outbreak.
Oh.
Right?
It was an Outbreak, I don't think. Katie was in, let's see now.
I know she was on 30 Rock.
She was on 30 Rock.
Wow.
I found something I found an article that said she was in Bruce Almighty.
Okay.
And has been in a few commercials and such.
I think this is the first time anyone's remembered Bruce Almighty.
Yeah. Well, Katie's handler remembers. But that's not listed on Katie's IMDb page. So, but that's IMDb for you.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, I think we've run out of time for Time of the Apes. Chris, do you have anything else to offer before we close the book permanently on this chapter in our lives?
Yes, so I have one final factoid for you. I got very curious about some of the voice actors in this, many of whom have had interesting careers, the most interesting of which is the voice actor who dubs Godo, the lone human that the three time travelers meet. Godo's English voice was dubbed by Garrick Hagan, and he has had many parts, both as voice actor and as physical actor, including a small role in a little film that we call Star Wars.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was in Star Wars. Original Star Wars, not any of the other fancy ones. A New Hope.
Not extra crispy.
He plays a guy named Biggs Darklighter because Star Wars got to be like that. More commonly known as Red 3, one of the pilots in the scene.
Red 3.
Yeah, he gets camera time. He gets a line or two. It's good. He's got a page on the Wikipedia. You can find out more about Godo at your local library or collect all the playsets and toys.
Oh, and incidentally, the disused monkey head that played Pepe, that actually grew up to play Porkins in Star Wars.
You know what, actually? Pepe looks like Itchy.
From Itchy and Scratchy?
No, Itchy is the name of Chewbacca's
from the
dad?
Star Wars Holiday Special.
Yeah.
Wait, is it Itchy? So it's Chewy, Itchy, I think Lumpy?
Yeah, okay, so no, sorry, yeah, he looks like Lumpy. Itchy was the little one. Lumpy was the pervert.
Yeah, because Lumpy wanted to watch all those aerobicizing videos.
Yeah.
I do love that the Star Wars Holiday Special pretty much lives up to its reputation for how terrible it is.
To quote Crow, it's like watching an aquarium.
Although it's still my favorite Star Wars thing.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you also had a small role in a Star Wars movie, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm, including And Thereby Hangs a Tale, in which TV's Adam Clark from popular internet podcast It's Just a Show interviews an interesting person about an interesting story once a month. It's really interesting. Thanks again to all our Patreon supporters. You can support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits from this episode and a bunch of older episodes by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/28.
Well, Chris, we've picked off all our ticks for this episode. What's coming up for us next?
Well, monkey say, monkey do. Ape will throw some number 2. And ape's a word that means to mimic or imitate. So we're going to just watch this same episode once again. But this time, KTMA era, episode 17. Time of the Apes.
God damn it.
Well, given that this is a Sandy Frank production, and we know that almost all the Sandy Franks from KTMA got remade in season 3, you might say that this was a given. I love KTMA. I'm excited.
I'm interested in seeing the KTMA. I do not want to watch this movie again.
Are you excited to see an episode that has no Joel?
There's no Joel.
There's no Joel.
That's right. This is a rare host-free episode of It's Just a Show. This is a rare host-free episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. A rare host-free episode of It's Just a Show would just be dead silence. So yeah, it's quite interesting. It's the only one of its kind.
Yet.
They're doing away with humans. This seems like ape propaganda to me.
That's why this episode was made in Japan. It's robots taking over the show.
I wonder if they'll return to this idea in season 12.
Maybe.
We'll see. All right, but on that note, until next time.
I'm amazed that we got through this entire episode without referencing the original Scatman, Apes. Bye.
Also, Pepe is a girl, guys. Get on the page.
Great. Until next time, see you later. Take it away, Theme Squad.
God damn it.